would you agree that there is a hierarchy of offences that you can commit within Islam?
It's our Trinity.
I've just chucked in out the question from nowhere. I think it may lead somewhere, yeah? For example, is there a worst offence that you can commit in Islam?
There's degrees of sins.
Excellent.
If that's what you're asking, yeah.
Yeah, I'm asking that. Excellent. So if we've got degrees of offence, wouldn't it be constructive for the various religions to triage out the hierarchy of offences and realise that the core things that you believe are probably quite similar? It's only at branch levels that, like, for example, I would argue killing is worse than eating pig, yeah, in the hierarchy of offences, yeah? So I think if each religion listed the things which it holds most sacred, you'll discover that you've got far more in common with certain other religions than you might care to admit, and that you're differentiating on small things like the Trinity. I've seen both of you guys having infinite numbers of arguments with Christians about the Trinity, which I would argue is very, very low on the scale of important things to discuss in the hierarchy of what's important in Christianity.
So you think,
according to me, well, there is a hierarchy.
are you saying
now, maybe
we need
my
to
perception.
talk about the sins before we talk about God? Is that what you're saying?
I'm suggesting that it's taking easy pot shots at them by looking at the Trinity.
No, what I'm saying is, do you think, shall we discuss God and God's nature and what God expects of us first before we indulge into the degrees of sin?
I'm suggesting doing both in parallel.
Don't you think you're putting the cart before the horse?
No, I'm saying do both in parallel. I'm saying if you
but you can't. God is the one who decides what sin is at what degree, whether murder is higher than you eating pork or something.
I'm not clear. What does it say in the Quran? I'm assuming killing is a worse sin than eating pork.
Yeah, but who decides that?
What is the worst offence in the sight of God?
Well, what have you got? I'm asking you how.
What do you think? I mean, just have some guesses. The worst sin in the sight of God.
It's going to be along
the line. The worst offence, rather.
Okay, whatever is the least empathic thing, take your pick.
No, but that's
okay. I take empathy. I think the common denomination with evil is where you see an evil act, you'll see a lack of empathy.
No, but you're talking from a
so
human
the most evil act will be the act which lacks most empathy. Now we can start listing disgusting things forever if you want.
No,
it's going to be something like
from God's perspective, not from human perspective.
Well, I think God's perspective correlates with. I think God is being coherent.
I think God came before us, so you were not there even to correlate before God. God is the one who decides what is halal, what is haram, what is permitted, what is forbidden. He's the one who is the ultimate judge of all that. And that's the reason I asked you the question, shall we discuss God before we discuss what he permitted and what he forbade?
And I said we should do both.
But
because
why?
it would be more constructive to constructive discourse.
But before
we can do both.
You know what?
We don't have to constantly look at the areas of friction because they're so self-evident.
Because what will happen then is that you will say that, no, my God says this is actually worse than that. And I will say, no, actually, my God says this is worse than that. So it'll become like your God, my God. You know what I mean?
No, I'm not. I'm hoping.
Let's decide first whether God is.
I'm hoping what will happen is you'll work out a hierarchy of sins and a hierarchy of admirable qualities, yes, in your religion and in, say, Christianity and in whatever else, Buddhism, whatever. And you'll discover that at the top of the things that you value most, you might find a hell of a lot in common, like the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is common to about 12 religions. It didn't originate with Christianity. It's in Islam. It seems to be a core axiomic underpinning of numerous branch laws which exist.
Others the way you
that seems to be a core axiom, which you see reflected in things like don't steal. Don't steal is just a branch evolution of treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself. Don't murder is a branch evolution.
I get that.
So we can distill it down to core principles.
But I think what's happening here is this. Look, usually this happens that.
Sorry, that was rude what I said about you two guys at the beginning. I apologise. It was a bit much. Okay?
Compliment.
I've seen enough of your tape, though, to see. I wish there was more breathing space, but anyway.
So you see, usually what happens is a very cool sort of liberal idea now is okay. Let's just see where we can agree. So, like you said, most religions they agree on these particular points. What Hashim seems to be saying is, well, God. Himself is important as well. It's not just about where we agree, right? So I think maybe that's a starting point for you guys to discuss. That's one thing I noticed about both of you. Like you're coming from the view of it's almost like this hippie view, liberal view of bringing everyone together. Hippie, I can tell, right? And his view is very much like, okay, it's not just that. God is also important. God is not also important. God is the most important, right?
Okay.
And that's the reason when you look at the first commandment, God puts us in order of priority. What is the first commandment? Do you remember?
No, not numerically. I can sort of probably list you the 10, but
So
not. You mean Moses?
No, yeah, the Ten Commandments given to Moses.
I don't know which one comes first.
Jesus also actually said is anyone who breaks the least, anyone who changes even a jot from that law of Moses is called the least in the kingdom of heaven. So that's the reason I was talking in terms of priorities. So what we are doing right now is like, for example, the question Mansoor asked you was very good. Like, what is the worst sin you can think of?
And I'm saying whatever is least empathic.
Yeah,
so
and
it's something like torturing innocent children for as long as possible. It's something like that.
Okay. What about
and
a person?
then killing them.
I'll tell you
Torturing
what.
them to death. Is that good?
In Islam, the worst sin you can commit is to reject God.
Okay, I can see that would trump it on one level. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
And that's the reason that is the first commandment in Islam, in Christianity, and even in Judaism. You see, God wants you to acknowledge Him before you start believing what is forbidden, what is permitted. He wants you to acknowledge Him first, because everything else is secondary.
I know that's your
If you're going to reject God, then everything else is secondary. Because I can find an atheist who can be more empathic than you and me, maybe. Yes?
Yeah.
Does that make him, in the sight of God, a better person?
Yeah.
Well, why is he going to hell then?
I don't think he is. That's where we differ.
So you're saying that
I'm saying that the nice
you're saying
person.
people who reject God will
I've
not
got
go to
this
hell.
crazy idea that the person who acts well maybe shouldn't go to hell.
But
That
you're
may
not
be
the one
very
making the
controversial,
decisions
but-
of hell and heaven, are you? I thought you believed in God.
You would consider me an atheist, but as an atheist would consider me a bit weird. I'm trying to walk the
I
balance
want to know
between
what
the two.
you believe in. Do you believe in God?
I don't believe in a supernatural God, no.
Which kind of God do you believe in?
I believe that human consciousness is a transcendent phenomenon which is undeniable, and that no purely empirical scientific view of the world will ever capture what creates it. So in a sense it's miraculous and it's self-evident.
So are you saying you're God?
I'm saying God is in all. I'm saying arguably God is in all of us equally, and we are manifestations of the divine. Something like that.
Could I not make a gross generalization here?
Please go ahead.
And say, look, these ideas fit together. Let's all look at the golden rules of religion, where things fit together, collectively.
Just a little bit at a time. We can do the battle.
Sure. And what is God? God is collective human consciousness.
Maybe
Right.
not. I'm not saying I'm right.
Okay.
I'm just chucking it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the alternative which Hashim is speaking about is actually that before we get to those topics, let's first look at what from God's point of view is important. Right? Now we're not belittling what you're saying from the perspective of good actions. Good actions are good. Being good to your parents, being good to animals, being good to nature. However, good with a small g you can apply to these things. But if someone was rejecting God, we would, as Muslims, say that person is not good.
I know you.
With the capital G.
This is where we have an issue.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take it there.
I think
'cause
this
that's the
pivots on a
perspective.
thing, and I've forgotten its name. I've seen Rationality Rules quoted, and in Plato, one of Plato's dialogues with somebody called Yuri something, but I can't remember his name. The discussion is God teaching us to be good? Does God command us to be good because good is already pre-existing? Goodness already pre-exists.
Oh, because God is good.
Or does goodness become good because God demands? What's it called?
Urethra's dilemma.
Thank you. Urethro.
Yeah.
I tried to remember that. I kept forgetting. Right, Urethro's dilemma, yeah? Now, I suspect that you believe that good is good because God commands it, whereas
God tells us what is good and what is not good, because we can be subjective. Your good might be His evil. You know what I mean? Just an example.
understand
So
subjectivity will
it's
create
subjective. So every atheist have a different view of good and evil.
Hold it, don't discard my thinking as being atheistic or relativistic, just because I'm giving a counter position, which is that I believe it's possible that God created a universe to be good, and then He taught us to conform with goodness because He created it to be good. Which isn't the
No,
same.
but your definition of God is quite different to what we believe. And that's the reason I said...
I think goodness may predate God, and God commands us.
See what I mean?
Okay,
So you see the dilemma that you're pointing out here. We wouldn't fall into the trap of giving one answer or the other. We would actually say this is again another false dilemma, because God is good, therefore God doesn't command evil, right?
Yeah.
So it's not the case that something is good because God commanded it to, because that would make good arbitrary. We would say God is good by definition, and God doesn't command evil. And in fact, God says this in the Quran.
Did you just say what I think you said, which was really sweet? Did you just say good isn't good just because God commanded it, because that would make it arbitrary? Did you just say that?
Yes.
That's radical. I never thought I'd hear
By the
somebody
way,
in your
but-
place say something
No,
like
no.
that. You wouldn't automatically assume that because God said it, it was divinely correct. You would actually judge it as being arbitrary, which implies that it wasn't
I
divinely
don't think
correct.
you fully understood my
No,
view.
maybe I didn't.
Yeah, okay. So this dilemma is basically saying, is something good
Yeah.
because God commanded it, or is it that good exists outside of God?
Yeah.
And then
Now, I subscribe to the idea that good exists outside of God, but God's nature is to reveal goodness to us. You would subscribe to a position which said, no, God creates goodness.
No,
Yeah?
No.
we wouldn't.
Oh, okay,
we
then
wouldn't.
I'm wrong.
We wouldn't actually fall into that dilemma.
Yeah.
Right? We would actually say
Yeah.
God is good.
Agreed.
Therefore, God doesn't command evil.
Yeah.
That's what we would say. We wouldn't just. Do you remember we were having a discussion earlier about can God create a rock so large that God cannot
Yeah,
lift
we
it?
did, yeah.
And then remember, I said about this dilemma that the question in of itself is incoherent.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's incoherent is when you break it down lexically, it's essentially saying, can God not be God? Because our definition of God
Right.
is all powerful,
Right.
right? So the same thing applies here. When it comes to good,
Yeah.
what we would say is that God is good and God's commands are not arbitrary. Now, going back to what we started off with when you came into the conversation with Hashim and Mansour here, you see, it's a very cool thing nowadays to say, look, let's all just get along. You know, let's agree where we agree, like you said with Islam.
Let's
Christianity.
notice where we agree.
Yeah, let's notice
I'm
where
not
we
saying
agree.
we have to
Yeah,
automatically
okay, sure,
agree, but let's
sure.
notice where we agree.
And also this idea about God being sort of human consciousness or this type of thing. All we want to do, what Hashim wants to do, is give you actually an alternative perspective, and then you can analyze it.
I do. I'm just instantly. I like a lot about Islam, right? I like the 5 pillars, seem great. I like the discipline that it seems to get in you guys in terms of obeying Ramadan and stuff. I think you might be attuned to some of the decadence in the West to a certain extent. I think the problem, though, is the absolute dogmatic literalism with which it seems you're compelled to interpret your text, and some of the negative fallout of that, which seems to me to be peripheral in the hierarchy of what's really important in your faith. And if a bit of branch trimming was done, then it could all work much better. Because at
Can
the
I ask a
moment we've
radical?
got
Can I ask a radical
irreconcilable
question,
problems, yeah.
Michael? Right?
Tony,
Sorry,
Yeah.
Tony. Can I ask you a radical question?
of course.
So you mentioned dogmatic and fundamental in a way that sounds negative,
I do see those.
He did use the word negative as
being
well.
negative,
right?
yes.
Okay.
And I see the positives I mentioned as being legit.
What if I was to say to you,
Yeah.
every single worldview has to have dogmatic fundamentals? Every single worldview.
I disagree.
Okay, I'll give you an
I
example.
think there's a fundamental problem with religion across the fundamental religion.
Forget
across the
religion.
board.
Forget religion. I'm saying every single worldview,
Yeah.
whether it's liberalism, communism, socialism, Islam, feminism,
Yeah.
whatever it is, theological or non-theological, every single worldview to be defined as a worldview,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be dogmatic and fundamental.
Otherwise, you wouldn't
By
be advocating it.
By definition.
No, I disagree.
If you didn't believe it to be fundamentally to be important, you wouldn't be advocating that ideology or that religion.
I'll give you an example.
I-
I'll give you an example. Can you have a container without any sides?
No, I don't think it's an accurate example, but no, you can't.
Okay, I'll explain how it's related to this. Let's take the most, what I think, a worldview that maybe you're more inclined towards, like liberalism, right?
Yeah, but you've probably got a very negative view of liberal. You might misconstrue my position.
Sure,
on
sure,
that.
sure.
I believe in moral absolutes. Okay, I hope.
No, that's fine.
So I'm on
Okay,
that one.
okay. So, firstly, if you believe in moral absolutes,
Yeah.
You believe in dogmatic fundamentalism
I
as well.
hope I'm in a world of moral absolutes. I might not be, but
You
I
sound pretty fundamental to me.
Well, yeah. I see. This is what I mean about common denominators. I think
Okay.
all the world's religions understand
So-
how important it is that we
Sure,
have
sure.
absolute moral value.
Sure. So
We share that in common.
okay,
Because the world
so-
without them, it looks pretty hellish to me.
so
Pretty
far,
dogmatic, my friend.
So far,
But no. But what I know is that doesn't mean that the world has got absolute moral. Maybe the world just is hellish.
okay,
It's possible.
okay. But so far, where we are,
can't reject it just 'cause I don't like it.
we began off with that you mentioned dogmatic and fundamentals in a way that sounded negative, but we
Yeah.
both agree
Yeah.
that we should be very happy and be fundamental and
I don't
dogmatic
think
about
it-
absolute morality.
Dogmatic to me means that you're overdoing your literalism. There's a sweet point to take things accurately. The difference between being accurate and being dogmatic is a jump.
Okay, So
Let me give you a counter position as to what I think may have happened as a problem with the world's religions, because just listen a minute. I think the world's religions, including you guys, have expressed their laws using what I call colloquial axioms.
Okay,
For example,
but the thing is, look,
which are binary.
Look, Tony,
Your thinking is
my
binary.
problem is you're putting the cart before the horse. Let's first define worldviews, religious and non-religious, and the point which I made, either you're going to accept it or reject it, and then we can take it from there.
I'm trying to tell you why I'm rejecting it, because I think you're expressing it in binary terms, and that's the problem.
Okay.
I think that the metric which goes things are either right or wrong or good or bad, yes, we've got used to thinking that's the only way to express moral absolutes. Now, I want moral absolutes,
I'm not saying that.
but I don't think that metric is essential.
But
and I can give you an example if you let me.
No, but Tony, before this, let's agree on something.
Go on.
Which is, when you said fundamentalist or dogmatic or these types of things, the point I made is any worldview, whether it's religious or non-religious, whether it's Islam or feminism or liberalism or whatever it is, it has to have dogmatic fundamentals, and therefore dogmatic fundamentals are not something which in of themselves are necessarily bad.
Okay. I think the word dogma is a trigger word. Can we just drop it and say it's got to have clearly defined, consistent principles? Does that work?
I'm going to use the word dogmatic and fundamental. I'll tell you what. Because no worldview can be a worldview unless it has dogmatic fundamentals.
Okay. Let's look at the world of science, for example. What science does, which is a very functional methodology, science is deliberately not dogmatic. It writes contingent truths. It's been said by Robert Pirsig that one of the advantages science has over religion is that religion writes its truths in pen, science writes them in pencil, because science understands that truth is a work in progress, so it can rewrite and learn and upgrade, whereas religion, fundamentalist religion, writes it in pen and then falsely thinks that it can't correct anything, so it can't grow. Now, I think growth is not incompatible with the notion of absolute truths if you're growing towards absolute truth. You take it as read there's an absolute truth, you start with the assumption that you've got a slightly clouded view of it because it's a human condition. Religion makes it very clear to us that human beings are fallible animals which have limited perception. So you go, okay, there is an absolute truth, I want to aim for it, it's like a compass point. Now I understand I'm a flawed animal and I may not always get it right, so I'll proceed with a certain humility, being willing to upgrade my view and improve towards absolute truth. But when you express it in these digital black and white terms, you make a mistake. Example. The idea that you shouldn't vote, that you can start voting at the age of 18.
Okay, wait, before we get to that, what I'm going to say is your example of science is a disanalogy.
Go on.
Because what I was saying was every single worldview or philosophy to be defined as what it is, it has to have dogmatic fundamentals or whatever type of
You're going to
axioms.
insist I agree with you on that.
No, I'm not. All I'm going to say is what you said about science is correct. Science's conclusions can be revised. Science's conclusions can always change. However, what we define as science is something which at rock bottom, even though there's differences on the way that you view science, we would agree certain things are fundamentally, dogmatically science and some things are not. For example, astrology and astronomy. Astrology is not science.
Agreed.
Astronomy is science. That is dogmatic. That's not something that we're liberal about.
Okay, listen, we're going to spend ages then. I would say you're making an accurate statement. Yeah, we don't have to call it dogma. Do we have to use the word dogma?
All I was trying to say, Tony, was that whether it's science or liberalism or whatever worldview it is...
You know what, for the minute to move it on, let's just agree with your definition of dogma. Dogma to you means that you're writing certain absolute truths in stone, yeah?
Certain parameters, truths,
I agree that there are certain things to be written in stone, but I think the things to be written are the compass points towards which you aim and not the individual steps that you take towards getting there.
I don't disagree with that when it comes especially to science. Now, when it comes to, say, for example, liberalism, which seems like the most accommodating worldview, it also has dogmatic fundamentals such as the individual is the most important entity.
Right.
And the individual rights cannot be trumped by the collective rights of others or the collective of the state. Right?
Some liberals, I'm not one of them. Yeah.
No, but I'm explaining to you the classic liberal paradigm, which is that the individual, the self, is autonomous, and the self cannot be overridden by the state. And that's a dogmatic fundamental.
Well, actually, I think most liberals believe in some state legislature, and by definition, state legislature will, when appropriate, override
Based upon the social
freedom.
contract.
Yes.
Yes, which again is based upon the liberal worldview.
Hang on,
So-
hang on. That was sneaky what you just
How?
said. Yeah. No, because you even smiled and you know it was sneaky. Okay.
How?
Because you said that we will always put the rights of the individual above that of the collective interest. But then you have that's all your assertion, and I have repudiated that by making it clear any society that introduces laws is willing to constrain.
Based upon the
And then
social
you've made it
construct.
sound circular because it's a liberal society.
No, it's not circular. What it is this. You see, the way liberals put together the social contract is still based upon the dogmatic, fundamental idea about individual liberty.
I think you've overstated that, and if you had a more nuanced view of some liberal views, you wouldn't see it as being quite so decadent.
I actually studied liberalism, so what do you mean
Good.
by...
Okay. Maybe that ups you in the ante, but even then you may have misconstrued or not perfectly balanced your view.
Sure, go
on it,
ahead.
yeah?
How did I?
I think there's a balance to be found between the individual and state interest.
Which
The
is-
state is just a collection of individuals. Anyway.
Which is the classical liberal paradigm.
I know, but the reason that I think the individual is so powerful... Look, your alternative is collective politics, identity
No, it's
politics.
not. No, it's not.
Okay, well, let's be clear that we both dislike identity politics, yes?
Yes, but that's a red herring. I agree with you, but that's a red herring.
Let's find common enemies. I'm not a fan of identity politics.
That's fine.
okay?
I agree.
Nor are you.
But Tony, the
I'm
point.
not a fan of relativist morality either.
So again, you believe in dogmatic fundamentals.
I believe in a thing. I just wouldn't call it dogmatic fundamentals. I call it consistent, moral, absolute.
So
Yeah.
Tony, what I'm trying to say to you is, whether it's liberalism or it's science or it's any philosophy, something which irks you a little bit is when absolutes come in, or fundamentals come in, or dogmatics come in. But what I'm saying is,
No,
for
that's
any
not true.
Okay.
I like absolutes. I'm aspiring to absolutes. I don't
He
like
believes
the
in moral
implications of
absolutism.
the word dogma, because where I come from, that implies that you've overdone taking things too literally. That's the implication of the word dogma
Okay,
from the
so-
school I come from. And you should be aware that a lot of people see it that way. Dogma is not a positive connotation. It means you've
depends-
taken something good but pushed it too far.
So, for example, I would say I'm dogmatic about moral objectivity.
Okay, I'm fine. Okay,
That's a good thing.
I too am dogmatic about moral objectivity,
Thank
but
you. We're in
I'm
agreement,
also,
but
I'm also aware.
That's what we've been saying.
I'm also
That's all
aware.
we were trying to
okay,
get to.
fine. If we have to do that, but I'm also aware I might be wrong. So I'm dogmatically attached to the whole.
You're not dogmatic then about
No,
it.
So
I
it
am.
cannot be absolute. If you could be wrong.
Yeah.
I hope I live in a world of moral absolutes, and maybe I do. But I can't be sure, and I realise there's a chance I live in a world without.
Can I
so
give
I'll
you-
fight
can I-
that
can I give you
battle
three
as
things?
a fair fight, yeah,
Can I
in
give
my
you-
conscience and with other people.
But if you're going to keep revising based on trial and error, then where does absolute come in this entire conversation?
I'm hoping that the absolute. It's like backing two people in a fight. Yeah, I'm looking at two warring
No, it's not.
ideologies,
Can I
and
say-
both of them seem to have some credibility.
Tony,
no, I'm backing moral
Tony, can I
absolutism.
give you three things I'm dogmatic and fundamental and absolute about?
Yeah.
And you can tell me whether you disagree with them.
Sure.
Okay? Truth, morality, and the existence of God.
I agree about truth and morality.
All right.
I hope in the world.
So at
I'm
least we
backing-
agree in dogmatic and fundamental. We agree,
I
it's
agree.
fine to believe in them.
I
Two-thirds is not bad.
I agree that there may be a world that operates like that, and I hope that is the world.
That's my world.
That's the world I'm hoping for, but I'm not 100% convinced by. But I'm hoping for and fighting for. Yeah.
Right.
As regards the God thing, I think by God you mean a literal, supernatural, intervening, miracle-working, omnipotent, omnipresent kind of super being. And on that, no, I think that's two literal interpretations of something which is more metaphorical and nuanced, which pertains to qualia, consciousness, and the hard problem in science of human consciousness and the subject. In other words, I think
Okay.
science deals with objects, religion and ethics deals with subjects, and the subject is a fundamental mystery, even in
your
science.
concept of God would then be not transcendent.
No, I think
It would be something quite.
No, I think qualia is transcendent.
In what sense?
Because how the hell do objects create subjective experience? It's insane.
But it's an object. It's
I know.
physical,
Well,
so
if
how
you
is it
believe if you
transcendent?
believe in the evolutionary view, and I have to, I do. Then in the beginning there was just objects, hydrogen, helium, stars, crunch, and it took a considerable period of time before suddenly subjects miraculously appeared on the cosmic stage. Yes. Now, a subject is something which has a property of qualia. Qualia has no energy and has no mass.
Go
and
back to what you just said. Did you say objects turn to subjects?
according to the scientific view of evolution of the universe, in the beginning there was just helium, hydrogen, stars. Then the stars crunched down, created more complex elements. Then on planets, the complex elements combined, and at some point you ended up with organic life. And at some point, organic life took on a property of awareness, feeling, sensation,
and you
thought.
Think this is all
sentiment.
natural?
Well, science presents a view which says that is natural, yes. And I go, well, I know that qualia and subjectivity exist because I'm it, so that's irrefutable. And the world model that science gives me seems highly objectively credible, even though I don't like a lot of it. I can't fight it.
I'm just going to ask
so how do you square this?
So I'm going to ask you this question. So how did we get from inorganic matter to organic matter?
Exactly. That's the big mystery science will never solve, and this is religion's
But you just said it was natural. So you made a claim.
Yeah, I believe it occurs naturally, but I believe that science isn't equipped to answer the question.
That's fine.
Yeah?
So that
and
means
religion is better equipped.
That's fine.
So
Tony, what you're saying is you have a belief. Let's be careful.
Yeah.
A belief that it's a natural process. You can't say you know it's a natural process.
Yeah, you have a belief to the contrary. It's
So
all
religion
belief.
is a belief
It's all
as well.
belief.
Yeah, that's the point.
Well, we believe atheism is a religion too.
Yeah, no, but it's all beliefs. We're all
Yeah,
playing with
we
beliefs.
are all fighting in the beliefs.
Yeah. The
Well,
only
not
thing,
really,
as I
not
consistently
really.
say, the only thing I know epistemologically 100% is that I am. Okay? Epistemologically, the only thing I know is I am.
Tony, I don't think that's true.
Okay, what else do I know for sure?
You know that truth is important, which is why we're having this
That's a
discussion.
belief I have, which I'm strongly committed to, but I
Right.
don't know it 100%.
You don't know if truth
No.
is important?
Not 100%, because I might be dreaming this whole thing. If I'm going to be epistemologically thorough...
Wait. If you're dreaming this entire thing,
Yeah, it's possible.
and if you're worried,
You know this is true. You're nodding with
and
me.
if
You know
you're
epistemologically
worried,
it's true.
if you're worried about dreaming,
I don't think I am dreaming. I think it's
Okay,
real.
fine.
But-
But for you to differentiate between you dreaming and you having having a real experience,
Yeah.
truth is still important.
I know, and I'm saying I'm 99.999% sure that's correct, but given I might be dreaming the entire thing, my premises about truth may themselves be a dream delusion. I know it sounds like I'm disappearing up my arse here. I'm just trying to defend. I know it does, but I'm trying to defend epistemology. It's very important. The backbone of all of these discussions will be epistemological, and people often talk about proof and knowledge to mean 100%. And actually, if you look at what you know and inspect what you know, 100% you know virtually nothing.
That's
with
not true.
incredibly strong probability.
That's not true. That's not true.
No, I don't even know
not
that. I
Ask me if that's
believe
statement is
that
true.
very,
Sorry,
very
let's have one
strongly, and the
conversation at a
evidence
time,
supports
please.
it. But if you look at what you really know and how deceiving the mind is, and you go in depth, you'll realise you know virtually nothing for sure. That doesn't mean you shouldn't make progress.
Let's
I'll
boil
play
it
the
down.
odds.
Okay, let's play it down to this point. What is your definition of knowledge first?
Well, I think when people say knowledge, they often mean 100% certainty. If you mean that, then I know virtually nothing apart from I exist. If by knowledge you mean things which are hugely probable, then I know a hell of a lot. It's hugely probable the Earth won't suddenly swallow me up. Okay?
Look, since you spoke about epistemology, let's go back to a traditional definition of knowledge, which goes back to Aristotle. Knowledge was defined by the ancient Greeks, and this definition went all the way to the 20th century as knowledge is true justified belief. So when something is true, when you're justified in it, and when you believe it to be true. So that's the traditional
I don't think that's real
tripartite.
knowledge.
It doesn't matter what you think.
I can run with that
So
definition.
this is the.
Does your knowledge have to be 100%
No,
certain? That's all I'm
No,
asking.
I wasn't giving my view. I was giving the
The
traditional
view
view.
that you are putting on the table at the moment, I'm
Very
asking, does it
noble
have
of
to
you
be
to say that.
100%? Does it have to be 100% certain, or does it allow for the possibility of 0.1% doubt?
Well,
is that still knowledge?
okay,
if
so-
I've got 0.1%
Okay,
doubt?
so this is why it's important to define what we mean by knowledge.
Exactly.
The way I defined it, I'm not saying I agree with it.
Uh-huh.
The way I defined it is true justified belief. Okay. Now,
it's a bit tautological. It's a bit circular.
okay.
But carry on.
Well, I'll explain where this came from. This came from essentially the early Greeks.
I know Aristotle.
Uh,
it doesn't mean he was right. but
No, it
yeah.
doesn't mean it's right. And then this carried on to the 1960s. I'm going to just give a bit of history here. So according to that definition, it's certain. Why? Because it has to be true.
Okay.
According to that definition. But then in the 1960s, there was this philosopher by the name Edmund Gettier.
Yeah.
And what he did is he came up with these things called the Gettier Cases, in which there is something which is true, something you're justified about, and something you believe, but you don't have knowledge.
Okay.
So an example that he gave is a clock that's broken, and you look at it, so you're justified in your belief about the time.
Yeah.
It is true that it's 2 o'clock, and you believe it,
Yeah.
but your justification is incomplete because that clock's actually broken.
Okay.
So he came up with these things called the Gettier
With
Cases.
respect, I'm guessing that before 1960, these ideas were delved into.
Okay, now this is a very interesting point,
Okay,
right?
I think-
And this is where I'm going to bring in a bit of the Eurocentric view of philosophy, is that until the 1960s, nobody came up with this idea that true justified belief doesn't work, right? Other than Edmund Gettier. However, what is known is in the Indus Valley civilization some 2,000 something years
These
ago.
are old ideas.
Well, some of their philosophers noted this, but the Greeks did not, and nor did the Europeans, which is why even till today, credit's not given to the Indus Valley civilization, credit's still given to Edmund Gettier, although the Gettier Cases
I'm
were
not
known...
guilty of that.
No,
okay?
I'm not.
I'm
no.
happy to
I'm
give
just
credit
giving
to
some...
whoever came up with it,
He's not
whatever
blaming you.
tribal
No,
religion they're
I'm not blaming
okay?
you. All I'm doing is I'm giving you some historical
Background.
information.
Thank you for the history. Can
Yeah.
I now, but now, to repeat my question, the definition of knowledge you're putting on the table, does it predicate on 100% certainty or not? This is just important
Okay,
for
okay.
defining
So for
terms.
me, the definition...
No, did
that-
you just make it relative by saying for me?
Yeah, because before I gave you the
I
history...
thought we're talking about absolute.
No, before I gave the history, now... Well, your statement's not relative.
I think we've got
so,
time. Thank you. Cheers.
It's all relative.
So when it comes
I don't think
to
so,
knowledge,
yeah.
the way that I define it, I believe knowledge to be certain, 100%.
Okay, would you agree that there are some things, a lot of things in fact, which seem highly probable, but you can't be certain about?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
would you agree that there's a fair chunk of those things which are very, very useful? Ideas to play with, form agreements on.
Scientific ideas.
Yeah, scientific ideas, for example. No scientific idea claims to be 100% certain. That's why they call themselves theories. So, perfect example. So, the whole of science consists of knowledge which is not 100% certain, but nonetheless has massive utility to all of us.
Yeah.
And we would authenticate as having some, verifiable merit. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I want the ability to engage with with ideas of merit, like science, without falling into the trap of assuming that they are 100% rigidly, definitely the case, because I understand they're provisional. Yeah? So I'm living in a world where I've got to play the odds, where I realise all of my decisions in life are based on playing the odds of certainty, and the art of living well is to play the odds well. Therefore, if I roll 2 6-sided dice now and ask you what number you think you should come up, the wisest answer you will give is 7. We don't know what will come up. It's a probability curve, and the most likely answer is 7, so the best answer is 7. It might not turn out to be a 7, but wisdom lies in playing the probabilities well. Yes? So as long as we understand that there are probabilistic things for us to discuss, and very few, I would argue, 100% certainties, then we're on very good.
Okay, so
we're on very good ontological ground
what
to
you
continue
what
the
you
debate.
just said there, Tony, is neither here nor there. Because
Really?
the point...
I thought that was
Yeah.
quite important.
Well,
I'm
From-
talking
from-
about the data set that we'll be dealing with and pointing out some of it is 100% certainties, but a lot of it, most of it, won't be 100%
Yeah.
certain, but will be valuable, and we've got to treat it with a
but
bit more
the
care.
reason why I'm saying that is because I don't disagree with that in most of what you're saying. But the issue we began off with hasn't been resolved by what you just said, and nor have you which is that they are fundamentals and they are absolutes and they are dogmatic things which hold any worldview together.
Okay, and then absolutes need to be 100%. Yes, an absolute is
absolutes
by
are
definition 100%. I can't help but notice a number of things which aren't 100%, but are very useful.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay, so
I
our
don't disagree with that.
mutual dilemma is how do we integrate the useful things which aren't certain with the absolutes that we both think are necessary in a constructive package?
No, that's
how
not the
does
question.
your religion achieve that? How do other religions
No,
achieve that?
see, that's a separate issue we can discuss. For now, and the reason why we had this discussion we began off with is because our discussion was revolving around your initial claim that dogmatic or fundamental or absolutisms aren't necessarily a good thing. And I was saying that some fundamentals, some dogmatics, some absolutes have to be there for any worldview to make sense in of itself, or else that
You're
worldview
so
will not be a
insistent on
worldview.
that, I'd like to move beyond the definition of dogma. So if I say yes, okay,
I think you don't like the word dogma.
I know. I don't think you may not genuinely be appreciating that if you come from my kind of tradition, the word dogma is very loaded with negativity. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas if you come from your tradition, I think it's loaded with more positivity. And to an extent, we're just hitting that
Well,
wall.
no,
Okay?
I don't think it's about our worldviews. I think
Let me give you a practical. I tried to
Sure,
give an
sure,
example before.
sure.
I think religion. I know it's a broad thesis, but I think religion may have fallen into this trap of creating what I'll call colloquial axioms. Yeah, where they make statements digitally about this is wrong and this is right, which they express as yes, no, but actually they shouldn't be. They should be expressed on a sliding scale relative to an ideal. It's a different measuring device. Here's an example. When we say people can vote when they're 18. We make a law, we go, you can vote when you're 18, yes? It's wrong to vote before 18, it's okay to vote after 18. I call this a colloquial axiom. It's an agreement we make to make society functional, which recognises that newborn babies ain't good at voting, and that somewhere down the line they should evolve into something that's capable of voting, yes? But we shouldn't misconstrue it to mean for 1 second that what it means is that on the moment someone becomes 18 years old, they are instantly capable of voting, whereas the second before they were 18, they weren't. In other words, it's not a statement of ontological reality when I say
I agree with that.
once you're 18, yeah? It's a digitally expressed thing which is trying to take into account the underlying truth, which is everyone's got an ideal age at which they become mature enough to vote, and integrate it in a way which makes it sociologically functional and encodes it as a law we can all bloody understand. And
Totally agree.
Okay, we all agree. Now I think great. So you can see.
Can I ask
so
you?
don't mistake your
No.
colloquial axioms for your ontological axioms.
No,
and
I
then
don't.
I think we're going to be sorted.
I don't disagree. But I was going to ask you this question.
Yeah.
So this
And
hit,
when we agree, this is
we
good.
do agree
This
here.
is good.
But you know this view that you came with before about let's just try and see where we can agree in terms of different religions and philosophies
was a
before
goodie.
we go to where we disagree. Can I not just make the claim that this view that you've come to, you may purely have been socialized into this because you come from a
I
liberal
very much
society?
believe I thought it through for myself. Seriously, I've done a lot of thinking on my own ground, and I try not to fall
What
into
does
any
religion
particular
do?
herd. And what you notice is obvious things like, I mean, Mohammed Ajib last week, he was saying,
Muhammad Hijab.
Hijab and Session. Not good enough.
It's all right.
He was saying to somebody,
Hijab, what
we
you wear on
have
your head.
objective truths, but not absolute truths, right?
Morality wise.
Yeah, morality, you
no,
said.
But ontologically, we believe in absolute truths.
Well, he said, we believe that there are truths which are objective, but they are not absolute, yes?
Meaning
No.
moral truths.
Moral truths.
Yes,
Which to
but,
me is
but
indicative.
ontological truths we do.
Okay, to me, given that you value monism and so do I, ideally I'd like to see that apparent disparity synthesized down into something where you didn't have to subdivide it into two categories.
Did you say monism?
Yeah,
So,
the belief in a single underlying principle. Monotheism is a sub-school of monism.
no, okay.
I promise you. Look, it's
okay,
monism.
Look, we don't hold. Monism is a very broad term, and it can
I know.
apply to either consciousness or these types of
Yeah.
things. So, when it comes to, say, for example, us as cognitively conscious beings,
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't believe in monism. We'd actually believe in a sort of Cartesian dualism.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a whole different discussion.
Interesting,
that's
isn't it?
Interesting.
Interesting.
And
And that's where we disagree.
I apologise. I took us off track. I gave the example of the 18.
Sure.
Now let's look at. We have a general rule which goes, "Thou shalt not kill." Yeah. So we'd like to believe that that's a moral absolute, but I think it's actually a colloquial axiom because none of us believe that you really shouldn't ever kill, do we? So it's encoded in your laws. It's encoded in our law and in our religion.
I think the more
Thou
accurate.
shalt not kill, but no one believes you
Yeah.
should never
Yeah,
kill.
so-
We
so-
understand it.
Yeah.
That depending on
Yeah,
the position.
exactly, you're
situation.
right.
I would actually use a
It's
different
digitally yes
term
and
than
no.
kill.
Yeah.
I was.
The real truth is the actual moral axiom is one should aspire not to hurt other people unnecessarily. It's not digitally yes,
Yeah,
true or
yeah,
false.
so
that
this
you
is where-
shouldn't
this
ever
is
kill.
what-
I think the command is thou shalt not commit murder.
Right, not
There's a
commit
difference
murder.
between
Yes,
kill
right.
and
There's a
commit
difference
murder.
between murder.
So everyone will agree that we shouldn't commit murder. Everyone will agree that we shouldn't rape. So these things are morally.
Okay, let's take
I think these are moral absolute, which
Murder
everyone will
does-
agree regardless of their belief
Actually, I don't
or
believe
disbelief.
anything. Okay, another question that he put to the guy he was
But
debating
can I
with.
just make
Okay,
one
go
point?
on. I'd say,
What
I
Mo-
hear what you're
this
saying.
is where what Muhammad Hijab said to you last week makes sense. So we don't
It
believe
wasn't me, it
in
was another guy.
yeah, we don't believe in absolute morality. We believe in objective morality, although we believe in an absolute ontological foundation of morality. So let me just explain those things. So, for example, as Muslims, we believe we are not allowed to drink wine.
Yeah.
So that's objectively true. However, if you are thirsty and you're going to die, you can drink.
Good.
So,
Perfect.
so what that means is, we believe in objective morality, and that objective morality is based upon an ontological foundation, which we would say is the Quran or the Sunnah or the teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? So we don't disagree here. However, I think what's important is we still can't escape the absolutism when it comes to the fountain of morality. That's something.
Oh, okay, that's different.
Yeah.
Okay, but then that means that the commands about you shan't steal, for example, I take your difference between murder and killing, and that makes it more difficult.
Yeah.
But let's take steal, yeah? As a general rule, you shouldn't steal. So it's a colloquial axiom which we can apply and agree on. But no one believes, hopefully, that you literally shouldn't steal in any given situation.
Even in Islam, yeah.
Okay, so your colloquial axioms are there really to be public representations of deeper core axioms which are moral absolutes, which will apply in every situation in which we should aspire to. Now, I'd say the golden rule seems to fulfill that criteria of being a moral axiom which is an absolute, which other moral rules which you bump into are reflective of and arise from. Does that make sense? So there's a hierarchy of moral axioms, and the core ones are things like the golden rule. It naturally follows from the golden rule that you wouldn't commit murder and you wouldn't steal, etc. Because if you're going to treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself, you don't steal from them and you don't murder them. So those sub-rules are just branch evolutions of a core moral absolute.
So I don't disagree.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't disagree with the way that you're trying to categorize stuff. However, as Muslims, and this is where we disagree, what we would say is the first, utmost, absolute good is the worship of God alone. And like he said, the greatest evil is to reject God and worship other than God.
Yeah.
And then after that, we bring in parents, we bring in society, and then nature, and basically everything comes down from there.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I think where our worldviews collide, where we have a disagreement, is that when we make the claim that the greatest good that you could do is the objective worship of God, that we recognize God as being the greatest. Now, from your worldview, you believe in murder's wrong, being good to your parents is good.
I don't per se believe that things are digitally right or wrong in themselves.
There are exceptions, is that what you're saying?
There are generally going to be exceptions. In other words, any moral situation you have to judge in the context of what's actually happening in the real world at that moment. Until it grounds out in a real experience, you can't judge the motives of the participants, and it's all about motive. Sin is all about motive. Yeah? I may kill you with a very benign motive because I'm trying to stop you destroying the planet.
That's a good insight.
Yeah?
I like
It really is all about motive. I actually think that you don't sin against other people, you sin against yourself.
You know what's interesting about what we just said there? I just came from and that's why I'm wearing a suit. I don't normally wear a suit. I just came from the Uyghur tribunal. You know, there's a tribunal happening in London.
No, I didn't.
So Sir Geoffrey Nice, he's a British lawyer who is sitting in Westminster hearing testimonies from concentration camp survivors in China. Right? What was very interesting is in today's testimony there was a woman who basically was being tortured for being a Muslim. Right? Her name is Miss Thurston. Now, when it came to her faith, she rejected her faith to stop the torture.
Right.
And we believe as Muslims, if you voluntarily reject your faith, that's a bad thing. However, if you reject your faith out of coercion, that's not your fault.
Yes, because your
so
intent
again, the
was
intent
not
is
to reject.
there.
Under
It's
duress,
the essence of morality is intent. In fact, the essence of everything is intent. Always look to motive.
But then,
So it's not the act itself, which is what the digital don't do this,
But-
don't
but
do that.
there
thing
is a-
twice.
but there is-
It's always about what is the person's motive.
but there is a nuance. The nuance is the consequence still dictates whether you are liable for some form of retribution.
Now that's because you're a moral consequentialist, which I'm not.
No, it's not because of that. I'll
Oh,
tell
okay.
you.
You said consequence. It implied you're a consequentialist. I think with the best intent, I might produce a catastrophic outcome and the reverse. And I don't think you should judge me. You should judge me on my intent and my negligence, which is the flip side of intent. If I'm acting with a positive intent and not negligently, to the best of my ability, I'm doing the best I can, and you shouldn't knock me for it. But when I do that, I may still produce an appalling consequence. It can happen. Now, the appalling consequence is regrettable, but I don't think I'm morally culpable because I did the best I could, and that's just the human condition.
You are right, however, and this is where there's a few things that are, again, in the grey zone. Like you said, it's not binary, right? Say something like manslaughter, right? So that's where you don't have an intent, say you're driving your car and you accidentally
drunk
kill someone.
driving.
Yeah, exactly.
They were negligent.
Negligent, right? But that doesn't mean that they're left off the hook.
No, because they were negligent, and negligence is also a moral choice. Yeah, they didn't mean to run anybody over. They just decided to get negligent about drinking, even though they knew it would
But
compromise.
it could also
their
be a case
ability
where they're
to-
not drunk,
Yeah.
they run someone over, but they would still face manslaughter.
Okay, we're talking about legal paradigms here, not moral paradigms, because what the law says is not necessarily what is the moral.
I agree.
You
But what I'm saying is, look, that's where we get into the grey zone,
Yeah.
right? But even though we're agreeing a lot on what we're speaking about in terms of the absolute ontological foundation, but then the objective way that it's applied,
Yeah.
the difference still comes down to, when it comes to our worldview, that our worldview begins and ends with God,
I get it.
and your worldview, where does it begin and end? That's what I want to know, just from your perspective. Where does it? What's the foundation of it?
It's a good question. It's the key question. It starts with an instinctive sense that
Sorry,
the human
just
could
a random. Just a random thought. Monty Python. What's the name of the guy?
John
No,
Cleese-
Monty.
Oh, don't say it. I keep getting this.
Yeah, I forgot his
Somebody
name.
What's
keeps
the
saying-
guy's name,
Please
man?
don't tell me you can say Palin.
Monty Python, I know.
Yeah, you just look like him.
I'm not.
The life of.
It's only down here.
Are you doing with the
I
movie?
get People go, you
No,
look like
that guy.
no, Michael Palin. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael Palin.
I hope not, but whatever.
Does he not look like him? Come on.
No.
Shit, I'm stuck with
That's-
it. Okay, whatever.
You mean the other guy looks like him?
That's not Monty
Whatever.
Python.
Not Monty Python. What
Yeah,
was it?
exactly.
Not
Okay.
Monty Python.
Michael Palin is that.
It's the guy who travels around.
Yeah, the journalist.
Yeah, it's Michael
He's a
Palin.
journalist.
Fine, thank you for that.
He looks like you.
Okay, yes,
Yeah,
he looks like me.
you, there you go.
He looks like me.
In his younger days.
I'm
So that was
hoping-
just totally random.
I'm hoping that qualia, experience, the subject is a miraculous entity. Okay?
You're hoping.
I'm hoping. I think you can create a cogent argument, which is defendable. It's not 100%, but a cogent argument to go that the subject, the ontological existence of the subject in the cosmos is a transcendent and, you could argue, miraculous event, which is undeniable. I know I'm here.
Could you break it down? I'll give you like 10 minutes. Just like, it's very interesting.
Fine.
Just want to hear it.
How do I break it down?
Like
I
you
know
said,
I
you-
am, and I'm a subject, which means I'm embodying certain properties which have got no mass and no energy. In other words, sensations, feelings, thoughts,
You think about your
cognition,
consciousness.
awareness. Yeah, consciousness, you would include all of those in qualia. So these are all the properties of qualia. And the hard problem of science is working out what the hell a subject is and what qualia is. It's got no mass, it's got no energy. It seems to have a causal relationship with the brain, which has got mass and energy. So we're looking at the mind-brain problem. The schism of the hard
so
problem.
just one question to really, not to challenge your view, but to try and understand your view. So, do you think the mind is reducible to the brain, or do you think the link is such that, the mind depends upon the brain, but it cannot be reduced to the brain?
Yeah, I like that one more. I'm hoping for that one more.
Okay, so you're more like
In other words, the
you're
relationship.
more like us as Muslims.
I think there's a lot of scientists who mistake. They go, well, if the brain explains everything that happens, it means the brain is consciousness.
Oh, there you go. Spot. You got
Okay.
a spot on that.
Right, so there's
got
a
a
very
spot on
fine line to walk here, yeah?
You're a deep
Where
guy,
I
I
don't
like
want to
that.
alienate the scientists, but I don't want to
No,
contradict
you would.
them.
By that statement, you would.
No, because they can't empirically argue with the fact that I am.
But
is
you
the-
know most of
is
them,
the
they're
most
arrogant enough to
epistemological
think they can.
There are some, but there are others who wouldn't. They can't argue with the fact that I am. Okay? That's a fucking fact. It means the subject is on the table incontrovertibly, qualia is on the table. How do we account for it is the problem, yeah? It seems to bear some kind of causal relationship with the mind. Now, maybe the mind is causing it the way a piano causes music, or maybe somehow you've got a soul descending into which needs the mind in order to function. That would be nice, but I suspect it's the former more than the latter. But either way, there's a causal relationship between the two. But clearly, qualia is what I would call a strong emergent quality which ticks all the boxes for being transcendent and miraculous. And you can't get away from that. And science will never explain what it is.
Yeah.
The human condition, what's good about religion is it addresses the primary question, which is, how should I live? That's not a question science addresses. Yeah, every human ever born raises the question, how should I live? And every human who is ever born will have to grapple with that eternal question.
Yeah.
And religion and the humanities deal with it so much better than science even claims to. But science does inform the building block facts that you need in order to come up with the answers about how should I live. And I think religion, in examples like the Golden Rule, which is in Islam and other religions, does a very good job of addressing that question with absolute statements which will be perennial for all people for all time. So I don't want to see religion get the hell kicked out of it by postmodernists or a purely materialistic reductionist view. On the other hand, I don't want to entertain some of the more negative views of what I'll call dogmatism, no offence, which is when I see people like homosexuals having a problem, or I see unscientific views being propagated, or the idea that good people wouldn't go to hell because they don't believe in something. I really do think what's most important is that you're a good person. I hope we have a deity who, if you behave as a good and empathic person, so to the best of your ability, with good intent, that's good enough to get you into
So
heaven.
I would say, in what you're saying,
Not because you didn't tick the right box on the multiple choice question, because you were a bit thin.
So what I would say is that I would agree with you on all of your points until the last couple of last points, right?
Okay.
Which are about hell and good and stuff like this.
Right.
So first, just to wrap up on the point about consciousness, right?
Yeah.
In essence, we would both say this means the materialistic worldview cannot be true.
What do you mean by the materialistic?
The materialistic worldview that the mind is solely reduced to the brain, the view of...
I think I always look for what the point of view I find most depressing, unfortunately. Because I should always steel man yourself. Any idiot my steel man position is I'd least like to believe that the brain causes consciousness, totally. But it seems, the evidence suggests there's a chance that's the case, unfortunately. I also...
wait.
Then the second question on
that's not quite right. I don't quite agree with that. So what you said earlier made more sense than this, and I think that's why...
Well, I'll give the counter-argument to my steel man in a minute.
Sure,
it gets very
sure,
refined,
sure,
okay? The even worse case scenario is that consciousness may simply be an epiphenomenon, yeah? Like Karl Popper, when he looked at this, he went, okay, maybe consciousness feedback loops into the brain to create brain functions which then produce consciousness and so on. So, for example, I'm crossing the road, I perceive there's a car coming for me. That perception causes an adrenaline rush, yeah? Then it turns out my perception was mistaken and there wasn't, but I've still got the adrenaline, it changes the way I feel. So the brain affects my consciousness and my perception, and we're in a loop, yeah? So maybe consciousness is in a feedback loop with the brain, or maybe, more depressingly, it's an epiphenomenon. An epiphenomenon means it's just noise that gets made by the brain, and the brain's going to do what it wants. That's the worst case scenario. Even in the worst case scenario where consciousness is caused by the brain as an epiphenomenon, it's still distinct from its cause. The thing that causes it is not it, by definition, yeah? So we're still left with a mysterious, transcendent thing with no mass and energy, which is epistemologically and ontologically 100% solid, and that's the best platform for religion I can think of.
So let's deal with the, I was going to say elephant in the room, but the ghost in the machine.
Yeah,
right?
go on, yeah.
So, from the Islamic point of view, we would say that is the ruh, that is the spirit, that is something which in the Quran, the way God mentions it is, we know very little about it, right? However, it is not something that can be reduced to the physical.
Yeah.
Now from your point of view, or for example, I said spirit, I should say soul.
Yeah, we're getting close to spirit and soul and qualia, and it all feels quite good.
Yeah, but...
it feels ballpark accurate. Let's not throw it away.
Yeah, I wouldn't put spirit, soul and qualia together yet.
Okay, but you can see that maybe there's something in there.
Actually, I wouldn't say yet. I would actually not put them together. I would not put them together. But I don't want to get into why. I don't want to get into why now. Because I think the soul is something which I think to even define, you just couldn't really do. I
think there's some wisdom in mysticism at a certain level.
We
can
define by elimination. We can say it's definitely not physical.
Yeah.
You see, now
I'm experiencing something and it has no mass and no energy, but it's definitely happening.
Now, from the Islamic point of view, there's something very beautiful, right? So you get rain coming down from the sky, and it makes plants grow, grass. Then you get animals eating that and all of that. So our physical being is nourished by water and by earth and everything around us. Mm-hmm. But the soul that Allah has put inside us, God has put inside us, that can only be fed through the remembrance of God. So we believe that through the worship of God, we can fulfill our souls. And that's why...
I believe you can do that. I believe that psychological approach you've got can bear fruit and work for you. You'll have good lives, you'll answer the question well, and you'll do good things, okay? My only problem is when you say it's the only way. Can't we just say it's a way? You framed it psychologically in a way that works for you, it works for your culture and your mindset. Bravo, that's good. Everybody needs a framing device, but in the process of denying other people their framing devices to achieve the same end, that's where the quote dogma ends up becoming problematic.
I'll give you I think you're going to disagree with totally, but as a Muslim I have to tell you anyway, which is that we do believe Islam is the only way. But if somebody has never heard of Islam, then how is Islam the only way for them? They're going to be judged in a different way.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yes, you've heard of it, so it's different for you.
I've discussed it quite a lot.
But the thing is, we as Muslims, we would say, as our paradigm teaches us, that the messengers before, the people who never heard about Islam, all of that, they can have a separate thing.
Yeah.
But when someone hears the truth, they recognize it's true, and then they reject it, then that's something that they're going to be questioned by God.
Yeah. So I'm in trouble.
Remember what I said. If someone here, it's not just. Look, I'll give you an example of one of the Islamic scholars. There's this very famous scholar who's actually linked to mystical traditions, but he himself is his name is Ghazali, Imam Ghazali, right?
Okay.
He said something very interesting. He said, if someone hears about Islam, it doesn't mean that they've actually had.
They have to have had an opportunity to understand it. That makes sense to me.
Yes, but it's a bit more nuanced, right? So, for example, one of the things to keep in mind is that the Romans at his time, and I believe the Turks at his time, this is 11th century, 12th century, something like this. He says, look, they've heard about Islam, but what they've heard is not really the entire truth. So then, in a way, they're not getting the true message. Yeah. So even when it comes to you, it could be that the message that you have right now is not even complete. We don't know.
I think, to be honest, I condemn myself here. I think I've done a moderately thorough job, and I have problems with infinite hell.
Right.
As I was discussing earlier, that's a turn off for me.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If hell did
Although
not...
Ali Dawah.
Ali Dawah.
Right. He did give me an answer I've never heard, and for a moment, and I'm still very impressed, okay? I've never heard this one, okay? My thing came down to infinite punishment for finite transgression seems disproportionate, yeah? Now, I've been discussing this for like 30 years with people, and you'll hear a lot of people, instinctively, it's a mismatch. And what he said was, no, what you don't understand is that God knew that if that person had lived forever, they would have kept sinning. So they got an infinite punishment because God knew that if they'd lived infinitely, they would have kept doing it.
Do you know where that came from?
Now, I don't believe he's right, but I do believe it's a very clever and interesting way of squaring the circle.
It's from the Quran.
Okay, that's in. Was he quoting somebody else?
Yeah,
Did he make
it's
it
from
up?
the Quran. It's from the Quran.
Oh, okay.
It's from the Quran. Yeah.
I'd never heard that. Okay, bravo to the Quran for thinking that.
Okay. So we believe God has 4 types of knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay? God knows the past, the present, the future, and the potential.
Yep.
So God knows what would happen if, say, Boris Johnson was not born in the UK and became the Prime Minister, but what would happen if he was from a poor Filipino community which was Muslim, and if he was brought up in a Muslim household, what he would do, and if he lived for, say, a million years.
You know this deterministically, do you?
What do you mean?
Well, you know it.
No, I know it. I would say God knows all potentialities.
God knows it deterministically what will happen. This is where you're digging. As far as I'm concerned, you're jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Because now you've got a God who knows exactly what's going to happen in advance.
We wouldn't say God. We wouldn't say God knows.
He's omnipotent. He must have. He's omniscient.
Let me just rephrase that. Okay. We wouldn't say that God knows. God knows of it like He forced that decision. We would say God knows everything, but God has also given us free choice. So as Muslims, we believe in free will and we believe in predetermination.
Okay, I hope you understand that at least colloquially, that's a hell of a circle to square.
And this is why
you do appreciate that point. It's not a false question. It's genuinely.
Genuinely, this is one of the most
determinism and free will is
a huge issue.